What I was thinking of chatting today is sort of this question of like, are we making impact? Because I think that's sort of right the question that we're all asking. I sort of riffed off the name of your organization a little bit, um, and it's something a question I ask myself all the time, like when I'm doing design work. So um, what I'll try to do is spend about like 30 minutes presenting and 30 minutes Q&A, and we might end up it might be like a natural breaking point to like pause and take some questions in the middle here or there. So I'll try to keep it like pretty casual. And just to double check, we're seeing the slides, right? Seeing the agenda slide.
I think
Yeah,
so.
cool. Awesome. I'm actually in between jobs, thankfully. Like this past year's been like pretty tough. So I like worked out a break between jobs. So I'm about to start at Shaper, but I squeezed out like a 5 week break in between. So you guys sort of like schedule this right in between, which is perfect. Get me out of bed and doing something during quarantine. So that's great. So at first, I'll talk about a little bit of sort of like my career, like from 2014 after, and then I'll go back and talk about 2007 to 2014, where I was really working in this space that your organization really cares about. So I really found my way into tech recently, and so at first I worked on online lending, and then I worked at a 3D printer company called Formlabs out in Boston, and worked on a variety of devices there, such as this one and this UI. And then I found my way to San Francisco, where I worked at Lifeform, which is a content creation tool for projected augmented reality. So you can create experiences in the top right and do that with this like content creation tool that looks a lot like design software. Uh, at the start of all of this, I had the unique opportunity to like work with some of my old coworkers on an emergency ventilator. There was a ton of designs for these at the start of quarantine, but actually, I think very few of them got used because they're quite intense for the patient. And I think the estimation of how much ventilators would be needed was actually less than what people thought the demand was. And the demand for ventilators is more of the very precise kind of ventilators that take a long time by the like very pro manufacturers that are in the space to make it. These much simpler ventilators just don't quite cut it for patient care. And I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but like one of the weaknesses of this device is that in order to use it with a patient, they need to be unconscious in order for it to be used because it takes over your breathing for you. Versus the more sophisticated devices will assist in your breathing. So the patient's breathing and they assist. And so they help the patient get stronger and better while they're conscious and awake. Just now, like I mentioned, I was at Samsara and worked on a few different products there, but one of them was a camera system that you put on a factory line to help do quality control as you're doing manufacturing. So you'd say like, I'm looking for this label, and you would train the system to look for that label. And if it wasn't there or there's something wrong with the label, you could reject the product and kick it out of the line. And so, like I said, I sort of had like two parts of my career. From 2014, I've really been in tech, and it's really made me reflect on what is my responsibility in tech and my role in it. And so, in the summer, I published whydoWeInterface.com, which is really this exploration of like, what is tech? What's the future of tech? How do we design for it? Like, why should we care? How does it influence our humanity? And really taking a historical approach to sort of think about what the future might be. So definitely encourage you guys to check it out if that kind of stuff is interesting for you. But I think how you guys found me is what I published in 2014 on the right, everyone deserves great design.com, which is actually my master's thesis. So I did a master's of fine art in industrial design, and I had the opportunity to reflect on a lot of the work I had been doing, trying to make impact. And one of the big lessons I learned was that a lot of times designs and people trying to make impact sort of look down on the people that they're trying to help and sort of consider them like helpless, or think they don't desire something really nice. And so this everyone deserves great design, this mindset trying to encourage people like and that like people want great stuff. Like just because they're in a shitty situation doesn't mean they don't want like a great product. And the reason all this thinking came about, so this website's up, and definitely encourage you guys to check it out. It is a bit dated, so even on the top, I updated like this needs updates. At the time, I was really hopeful that companies like Facebook and Google were going to make huge impact in developing countries by giving them free tools that were the same as tools in other countries. But more and more, I've become very critical of companies like Facebook and Google. They didn't live up to the hope I think we had of them back in 2014, and that's sort of what got me to write Why Do Interface, to be really critical of these technologies. And I'm personally becoming much more focused on tools that respect my privacy. Like, can I use DuckDuckGo search instead of Google.com? And I'm using a different email service rather than Google's email service. Trying to delete Facebook and Instagram. Facebook's easy, Instagram's a little harder, etc. I'm on a tangent a little bit, but I think the important message with both of these is being critical of the work I was doing and trying to share that. So now going back a bit into 2020 to 2014, which really got me started into discovering what design even was, what thinking about other countries, thinking about like how to create products that might be useful. So in 2007, I was actually a material science student. I did both my bachelor's and master's at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And one day I was trying to copy homework from my classmate, and sort of got this discussion going. And I was talking to John, who's on the left side of this picture of the four of us. And he realized that I was like sort of curious to learn about design. And I was taking this course where I was like working with industrial designers as an engineering student. And he was working on this project where someone had told him that he needs designers to work with him. And so he sort of recruited me to maybe come to the next meeting they had with their group. I didn't really know much about it, but I was really curious to learn about design and other opportunities. So I went, and it turned into a 5-year project that we worked on together. Ended up creating a nonprofit. Ended up traveling to a bunch of countries, all because I was trying to copy some homework, which I don't think he ever gave me. So the original goal didn't work out, but we basically, John had this vision that, okay, he's an engineering student. He wants to use his time and energy to make an impact, right? And he had sort of heard about this organization called Jaipur Foot in India. Maybe you guys have heard about this. They're pretty well known. They really do an incredible job of giving incredibly affordable prosthetic legs for patients, free of charge. They do a lot of care. I've been fortunate enough to visit one of their locations. And that was the sort of inspiration. Okay, Jaipur Foot's doing incredible work with prosthetic legs. And we're like, why isn't anyone working on prosthetic arms? And so we started digging into this. We saw that, okay, there's 25 million, some estimates say 35 million amputees around the world, and majority of them live in developing countries. And a very small percentage of those amputees in developing countries have actually access to good prosthetic care. And so we started latching onto this. Initially, we didn't really know what the solution should be. And I think we sort of made the classic engineer's mistake where we were working on electric and robotic hand. So we were like 3D printing a hand and trying to put electronics in there. And, it was getting interesting, and like we were getting attention. So we like thought we were doing a good job because, people at the university like that. But the reality was that like we started to realize like, and ask these questions of like, is this going to be helpful? Like if we can get someone an electric hand, like, will that be good solution for them? Like what if it breaks, or like, what if the batteries run out, or like, how does someone maintain this and fix it? And like the deeper we got into it, we started like questioning our assumptions a bit. But what really got us going is that pretty early on, John managed to win this huge prize, $30,000, that made it completely real for us. Like all of a sudden, we were an organization that had like won, I think like $600 or something, and we're like, oh, that's awesome. Like we're gonna print some posters and T-shirts. To like we won $30,000, and like what the hell do you do once you have $30,000? And so we had to make some decisions all of a sudden of like, is all this money going to the organization? What is the organization? Like we weren't sure if like we were going to be a student club or what it was. It was just like 5 or 6 of us like getting together to work on this. And we explored a bunch of opportunities, but we decided to become a nonprofit, which I thought was, and still think was a great decision to do. A lot of the organizations we worked with were nonprofits, and the value of being a nonprofit is that your mission is more important than profits. And so everything is about like furthering the mission. And so, like I said, we didn't quite know yet what the solution should be, but eventually we figured out that the most critical piece of the whole problem is not the hand. The prosthetic hands you can buy off the shelf. Those are things that already exist. The issue with prosthetic arm and creating care is that you can't fit an arm to a patient easily. And so what you're seeing here is us figuring out a bunch of different ways to try, how do you fit an arm to a patient? And even before we made these prototypes, there was a ton of different ideas we thought about of how can you make the fabrication process easier, or, you know, what can you do? And the more we like would think about these things, we'd realize, oh, someone has already done this. And so research, I think, was really key in these processes to not just sort of think like you're inventing something new. Oftentimes, like what's more important is less about invention and more about creating a solution. And so I think one of the mistakes I've seen ourselves make and other organizations make and student projects make is that it's much sexier to focus on invention rather than solution. And solution is so much more complicated, and I don't even know if we truly got to a solution because I'm sort of jumping ahead, but unfortunately, our organization wound down at a certain point. Like we didn't manage to keep it alive. It's not still alive today, and we'll come back to that. But eventually, we realized that the real key to making an improvement in prosthetic care is there being an off-the-shelf arm that could be fit in just a matter of a few minutes. So we took a lot of inspiration from shoes and how shoes used to be custom made, and now they can just be off the shelf and adjust to someone. And so these are a ton of different explorations we had. We ended up coming up with the name Open Socket, and this solution on the right was a precursor to a lot of the designs we did. So by this point, I think we're maybe like 2 years into the life of the organization. So it was not trivial to get to this point, and I'm really skipping over a lot of details of what it took to get here. But we were fortunate enough to work with an organization in Guatemala that managed to get us out and work with patients. And this started to get a lot of attention. CNN covered it. Our university put it on, you know, the homepage of the school. And so it could seem like, oh, we were successful. But at this point, all we had were really some prototypes. So still, this is our second trip to Guatemala. Now, finally, with a prototype where we could fit to someone, but the arm was made out of sheet metal. So it was a very heavy arm, still definitely not a solution that we would feel comfortable giving to a patient to live with. So it can look really glamorous and look amazing, but like I know from the reality is like this arm is not a good product yet. And I think the next slide, maybe another slide. I'll come back to that point. But we started working with a ton of different patients. We started working with different organizations. A lot of our work was in Guatemala. We also went to Honduras, El Salvador, and some work in India as well. And we made a point to also go to patients' homes. So a lot of patients we were meeting in clinics, but this is really where the sort of like, you know, design thinking principles come into play, and just sort of like, you know, you can ask people questions and they might answer your questions, but you shouldn't always take them at face value. And we wanted to really observe and go to, this is Mariano's house, and see, could we fit this arm to him there in his home? How long would it take us? Like, could we do it with just a few hand tools? What is his family like? Like, does he actually use the arm when he's at home? Like, can we observe him doing that? Or does he just tell us it's great, but really, you know, it's not? And those are tricky things to really figure out, but we tried our best to understand. But really, I don't think we truly started making progress and started making the arm into a good product until we started working with amputees in the US. And this is sort of what made us realize that everyone deserves great design. The ideas there of like, don't just design for people that are in a shitty situation. Like, you'll probably do yourself a disservice in like the quality you come up with. Like, we wanted to make the arm good enough so that these amputees who all had exceptional care, who all had a prosthetic arm, would want this arm, right? So traditional prosthetic arms in the US, this body-powered kind, cost between $5,000 to $30,000. No, we're not talking about any electronics. We're not talking about anything. It's because they're custom made one at a time per patient. They tend to be expensive materials, carbon fiber, etc. But one of the things we realized is that we thought like, okay, custom made prosthetics are the best. But the deeper we dug in is that they're made custom for you at a single point in time. And if you gain weight, lose weight, that arm doesn't adjust to you. We take for granted, like if you want to go on a run, you tighten up your shoelaces to make it tighter. Like imagine like, okay, you want to work out, you can't tighten your arm at all or anything like that. So we started realizing, oh, maybe there's something to like, maybe our arm could be a better solution for amputees in the US. Or maybe you could fit it to a patient like immediately after surgery. And so we started to realize like, okay, maybe there's something interesting here. And we really were trying to actually get it into the US market. There's a lot of challenges because working with insurance can be really challenging. But here you're seeing the magic of our arm. So it's a two-part system where there's plastic and fabric. So when it's in the fabric, you don't see any of this. But you can see how easily just with, a little bit of force that it adjusts to completely adapt to the arm. And there's 2 sheets of HDP inside that are more continuous, and they sort of create the feeling of a normal traditional socket that's custom made. And then there's these stronger, more rigid outside pieces that all go into fabric. You just pull 2 Dacron straps and it pulls it all together. So fitting our arm, the challenge of fitting our arm is not the socket. It's actually the cable system that comes with traditional prosthetics. So when you extend your arm out, it can pull the hand open. Getting that harness fit over the shoulders and getting the cable set is actually the hardest part. So we did come up with something that only took 30 minutes to fit to patients. We managed to fit 110 of these arms to patients. And right when we were getting ready to really take off, we had developed partnerships with organizations throughout Central America that had bought some and wanted to buy more. We had been making these one-off in our office so that we could adapt the design. So we were hand making each of these prototypes, and these 110 arms that we like sort of semi-mass produced in our office were all handmade. And we were just on the verge of starting to mass produce these, like make the plastic in a factory, have another factory make the fabric. And as we were getting those things in motion, things unfortunately fell apart for a whole variety of reasons that have taken me a while to come to terms with. I'll skip over that, but we ended up sort of abruptly not being able to continue. And one of the big reasons was we hadn't quite figured out the cash side of things. We had taken about 5 years to get to this point, and we had raised maybe around $200,000, but a lot of that was grants, and so we couldn't use it freely the way we wanted. And the way we wanted meant paying people. Like when you need to carry something on for so many years, we needed to pay people salaries, and we were paying, I think, 2 people. And we were paying each of them $1,000 a month. And, I think they did that for a year and a half. And at a certain point, the president at the time, he had gotten married, and he needed a real job, essentially, that could pay enough for his family. And our other founder, John, he had always wanted to go into public health. And so he had left his position. He was stationed in Guatemala to go to school, and I was in like the last part of my master's trying to finish this, and like this didn't exist yet, and I was drowning in this work. And so we sort of all got pulled apart into these different directions right before we had reached a potential sort of like pivot point where we could really mass produce this. And so there's all these questions like I've been asking myself, like, did the work we did make impact? I think we came up with like an incredible design. We managed to help 110 people with the arm that really needed it. I would have loved to have followed up and seen how well the arm held up with them, which I'm not 100% sure. Actually, I've tried to reach out to some organizations that we worked with and haven't heard back to see if they've been able to follow up with any of those patients. But I think we did a lot of great things. And I'm like really proud of the work we did, but it's been really hard actually for me to sort of deal with it because it was like quite sad and depressing and traumatizing that it didn't work out because it was really hopeful of the work we were doing. And so just recently I've been really writing about this. And so this is sort of a draft of the latest project I've been working on, thinking about what lessons do we learn? Like if there were organizations like your own that were trying to do this, like what lessons could I share about that? And so this is really rough. I'll share the link with you guys after this. I'm sort of like writing and publishing it all as I go. But I'll just share a few quick lessons and then I'll try and wrap up and switch to Q&A. But one of the key lessons that I already sort of shared was that like robotic arms are not solving the right problem, right? Like what is the problem? And really digging deeper in that is not trivial. So it's one of these things where I mention this because I see project after project after project that's like student created robotic arm for students in developing or for people in developing countries. But like that's not the reason why people don't have an arm, right? It's not because someone didn't invent it. It's that it's a much larger problem than that, right? You need to figure out distribution, you need to figure out manufacturing, you need to figure out cash flow. How do you monitor people long term? How do you provide that care? This is a bit of a more controversial one, but I think a lot of people, when they're creating things, they get caught up in patents. And the reason I say patents are pretty useless, they're not entirely useless, but they're pretty useless because they give a false sense of protection. But patents do not offer any protection. They're a sword. And unless you have money to go and chase people that have infringed on your patent, or you have a real opportunity to sell your patent to a different organization or license it, it doesn't protect you in any way. So I think people have a false understanding or hope that having a patent will protect them somehow. Sort of talked about this one, focus less on invention, more on solutions. This is a bit of a long URL. I haven't like mapped the domain yet, but this is where I'm publishing this right now. I'm happy to sort of, maybe I can drop the link in the Zoom chat. It will be easier here. But that was sort of the end of my slides. Maybe depending on Q&A, I might open up the raw notes and sort of navigate around. But that's sort of a bit of a casual sort of like walkthrough of where I'm at today, working in tech, and sort of that initial journey where I truly learned a ton about design and how to approach design and try to do great work. But these things are challenging, and I think sort of like having some awareness and being critical of your own work can really go really far. So hopefully that was helpful, and feel free.